Good morning, everybody. Today we'll discuss HBV infection and liver transplant and what is the role of HBIG free regimes in such a scenario, and try to develop an algorithm based on evidence or lack of evidence. So initial results of liver transplantation for HBV related end-stage liver disease were very disappointing, and graft reinfection and recurrence occurring in up to 100%. So it was considered as a relative contraindication or absolute contraindication to liver transplant. But gradually, since late 1980s, HBIG was introduced and subsequently oral antivirals were introduced, and outcome of liver transplant for HBV has improved significantly. And now that the overall survival of liver transplant for HBV is almost same as any other cause. So what do we mean by HBV recurrence post-liver transplant? So HBV recurrence means that circulating HBsAg becomes positive with or without detectable HBV DNA. So it is the HBsAg which becomes positive and it gives to HBV recurrence. This is the definition. However, only those patients who develop persistently detectable HBV DNA are at risk for clinical disease and graft loss. If only HBsAg is present, it does not lead to graft loss or clinical disease. So what are the mechanisms of HBV recurrence after liver transplant? Immediate reinfection can occur by the circulating HBV particles. Later reinfection can occur from HBV coming from extrahepatic sites such as peripheral blood mononuclear cells, spleen, etc. And immunosuppression also leads to enhanced viral replication, especially by steroids, which have a glucocorticoid responsive enhancer region in the HBV genome. There is also influence of genotypes that we will discuss, and there are certain genetic variants of recipients. For example, CTLA4 positive 49GG has a lower risk of recurrence, and this leads to the T cell responses against HBV. So as far as the influence of genotypes is concerned, there have been quite a few studies and which show that genotype D has higher recurrence as compared to genotype A, for example in these two studies. Similarly, genotype C has higher recurrence as compared to genotype B as shown in these two studies. So genotypes also have some influence on HBV recurrence. Now what are the risk factors for recurrence? There are certain high risk patients, for example high serum HBV DNA at liver transplant. We will see how high we consider as high. Patients with drug resistance prior to liver transplant, for example they have been receiving lamivudine, adifovir or other drugs who have high resistance patterns. HIV co-infection, HCC at liver transplant, these are high risk patients. And there are certain group of low risk patients, for example fulminant hepatitis B, because obviously HBV DNA levels are relatively low in fulminant cases. Low serum HBV DNA at liver transplant, and co-infection with HDV. Co-infection with HDV is a low risk for recurrence. Now what DNA cutoff should be considered as high risk? This was an initial study when high dose HBIG or HBIG plus LAM was used in this study, and it had 9 HBV patients and some of them having B plus T, B plus C or B plus D plus C. So we can see that HBV DNA positivity by non-amplified, that is more than 5 log, HBV patients were having higher HBV DNA levels, most of them, whereas HDV patients were having HBV DNA negative mostly. So this explains why HDV is a low risk for recurrence. And in the same study we can see that this row shows the DNA levels. If DNA levels at transplant is less than 200, recurrence is nil in both in HBV patients and HDV patients. If between 200 to 99,999, it is between 14% or 8% depending on what kind of prophylaxis was given. And if it is more than 100,000, then In combination therapy, 33% recurrence, and in monotherapy, 55%. Whereas if we see in HDV, irrespective of the DNA levels, there was no recurrence. Now, this was the study on the combination therapy. This was a recent study on antivirals alone. Patients were given entecavir and no HB was given any time, whether peri-transplant or post-transplant. And it was shown that at 1 year, HBsAg clearance in undetectable DNA levels was 98%, in less than 4 log 92%, more than 4 to 6 81%, and above 6 log it was 60%. This is the data at 1 year, but as the time progresses, HBsAg gets cleared more. So this study found that more than 4 logs could be a risk factor. But we know that we have very highly potent antivirals now available, and our goal is to reduce the HBV recurrence to less than 10%. So ALD 2018 guidelines suggest that a lower DNA cutoff, such as less than 100 IU per ml, is more appropriate for risk stratification. So what happens if HBV recurrence occur? So recurrence of HBV, if it is accompanied by recurrent liver disease, that is DNA positive, abnormal liver function test and liver injury, then it is often severe and rapidly progressive. And if it is not treated, then cirrhosis will occur in 1 or 2 years of reinfection. FCH was initially observed in 1990s, but now it is not observed because of early diagnosis of HBV reinfection and recurrence, and effective antiviral therapies are there. Now, some patients can remain HBsAg negative, but detectable levels of DNA in the liver or PBMCs by sensitive assays. But most of these patients will not have any clinical or histological disease. So whether these patients will eventually develop reinfection if they are taken off prophylaxis remains unknown, and that is the rationale for importance of continuous lifelong prophylaxis. So how do we prevent HBV recurrence? Broad strategies are treat pre-transplant to keep HBV DNA as low as possible, and post-transplant prophylaxis. We will discuss post-transplant prophylaxis today. So this is how evolution of prevention regimes have taken place. Initially it was HBIG monotherapy, then antivirals plus high or low dose of HBIG, then concept of HBIG withdrawal after giving HBIG for some time came, and then antivirals without HBIG came, and now there is also evolving concept of withdrawal of both HBIG and nucleoside analogs after some time after transplant. So this is the structure of the surface antigen. If S protein contains the S region, M protein contains S plus pre-S2, and L protein contains S plus pre-S2 plus pre-S1. And this is the region of the pre-S1, which is a receptor for anti-CP 2 to 48, and this is the A determinant region. And we'll see this importance later. So this is how HBIG acts. This is the how HBV enters. This is the two receptors, heparan sulfate proteoglycan receptors, anti-CP receptors. After entry, the relaxed circular DNA becomes converted into CCC DNA in the nucleus, then transcription occurs, then these proteins are transcribed, and then they are packaged, assembly, and released back out of the hepatocyte. So HBIG acts at least 5 steps. Classical pathway is that it forms immune complexes with the subviral particles and virions. Subviral particles are when there is no genome, and this is subviral particles. So first is it can form immune complex with these. Second is the A specific, we have seen the A region, that can bind to the heparan sulfate proteoglycan receptors. This is the initial receptor which comes before the anti-CP, attaching to the anti-CP receptor. This is the second mechanism. The third mechanism is pre-S1 region, specific anti-HBs that can inhibit the HBV binding to the sodium taurocholate receptor. Then Anti-HBs can also bind to the HBsAg that is present on the surface of the hepatocyte, and that leads to antibody-dependent cellular cytotoxicity that is mediated by either complement activation or natural killer cells. And the last mechanism is anti-HBs gets transported inside the hepatocytes and thus neutralizing and blocking the release of virions. So these are the 5 mechanisms. So initially HBig alone was used. This was the study published in NEJM, and in this was a retrospective study. 3 groups were divided: no HBig, short-term HBig, and long-term. Long-term was defined as more than 6 months after liver transplant, and it was shown that patients on long-term therapy had 30% risk of recurrence as compared to the 70 to 80% in no immunoprophylaxis or short-term therapy. And after that, several studies have demonstrated that HBig alone was effective, and so HBig became the standard of care in early 1990s, before the antiviral therapy became available. So this was the regime that was used: high dose HBig alone. HBig usually was given as 10,000 unit bolus in the anapatic phase, daily doses during the first week. Then subsequent doses were either given monthly or according to the anti-HBs titers, and trough anti-HBs titer of at least 100 was thought to be protective, although it was shown that if we keep the anti-HBs levels above 500 IU per liter, then there is further reduction in HBV recurrence. But the problem was that anti-HBs titers varied from patient to patient, also in the same patient with repeated HBig. And it is also important to note that serum HBV DNA levels at the time of transplant was an important predictor of the half-life of HBig. Higher the HBV DNA levels, the lower is the HBig half-life. So immunoprophylaxis was abandoned after introduction of lamivudine. Then lamivudine monotherapy was used. Initial studies were enthusiastic, but again over the long term, occurrence of resistance was a problem. This was also abandoned. Then antivirals plus HBig, high dose versus low dose. This is the compilation of the studies which show high dose HBig along with lamivudine and adifovir. It showed that as compared to HBig or lamivudine, the combination was much better in preventing recurrence. But if there was lamivudine resistance, the recurrence was higher. After that, low dose intramuscular HBig was tried to reduce the cost of HBig used, and it was again found that IM HBig had similar kinetics and produces trough concentrations equivalent to those produced by IV dosing, but at a less cost. And these are the studies which show that recurrence with the low dose intramuscular HBig and lamivudine or adifovir was quite low. Similarly, low dose HBig with entecavir and tenofovir was tried, and it can be seen that with entecavir and HBig almost 0% recurrence, but follow-up was quite less in these cases. Now HBig withdrawal after some time. This was the next concept tried, and this is a compilation of studies in which HBig plus nucleoside or tide analog combination was used, and eventually there was withdrawal of HBig. Various studies, various regimes. For example, in this study, HBig was given for a week only. In another study, for 12 months, at least 12 months, and HBV recurrence was quite satisfactory: 12.1%, 3.3%, and 11%. Similarly, combination with tenofovir or entecavir and eventual withdrawal. Again, recurrence rates were very less and mostly less than 10%, except in patients who had prior resistance. Now came the concept of highly potent nucleoside analogs without HBig, no HBig given any time during transplant. These were some of the studies using variety of antivirals, lamivudine, entecavir, combination or tenofovir, and ultimately it was shown that the HBsAg loss was quite high, and recurrence was in the range of up to 10%, 10 to 15% in various studies. And even patients who developed HBsAg positivity, their HBV DNA remained negative. Now we'll discuss one study, which this is the largest and the longest study, longest duration of follow-up study on only antivirals, no HBIG. This was a study from Queen Mary Hospital, Hong Kong. 367 chronic hepatitis B patients, all patients positive for at least 6 months prior to liver transplant. Out of this, 265 patients were on entecavir monotherapy. Rest were excluded because either they had lamivudine-based therapy or LAM resistance or combination therapy or various other causes. All patients received entecavir monotherapy and did not have any LAM resistance pre-existing. 0.5 milligram per day mostly given, although there were a few patients who were initially given 1 milligram, later changed to 0.5. No HBIG was used before, during or after transplant, and no therapeutic vaccination was used. And if we see living donor liver transplant were about 50% and 50% were diseased. Indication of liver transplant, cirrhosis 28%, acute flare, that is reactivation of chronic hepatitis B in 37%, 35%, and HCC in 37%. Now DNA distribution at the time of transplant, 39% DNA undetectable, however 11% had DNA more than 6 logs. So there was a gradient of DNA levels. Now if we see, there was a high HBsAg clearance during follow-up, and cumulative HBsAg clearance was 70% by 3 months, 90% by 1 month, 95% by 5 years. Now as we can see, out of 265 patients, 242 developed HBsAg clearance, 14 patients did not develop clearance and they remained persistently HBsAg. Out of the 242 patients who had HBsAg zero clearance, there were 206 patients who had persistent loss of HBsAg. But in 36 patients, there were HBsAg reappearance. In 14 patients, HBsAg came back permanently, and in 22 patients, there was a fluctuating status. So, and out of the 14 patients with HBsAg reversion, none had a virological rebound. 5 died of unrelated causes, 2 tenofovir was added, and HBV DNA remained undetectable in most of the cases. So, point is that 85% of HBsAg clearance are sustained if patients are on high potency antivirals alone without HBIG. Again showing the same thing, despite HBsAg negativity in only 91.7% at year 8, 100% of the patients remained HBV DNA undetectable. This we have already seen that there is a higher HBsAg clearance in patients with HBV DNA less than 4 logs at the time of transplant. Now, even if the patients became or remained HBsAg positive, the liver stiffness was not very different. This shows the liver stiffness in patients who had HBsAg cleared, 5.2 kilos Pascal, HBsAg reappeared, 5.1, and no clearance, 5.5. So irrespective of whether HBsAg comes back or not, the FibroScan, that is liver stiffness, remains the same, and follow-up was quite good, up to 44 months, 60 months, and 53 months. So question is there any more benefit if we add HBIG to this regime? So we had seen that 15% of the patients, they remained HBsAg positive throughout the duration of therapy, but it does not really signify HBV reactivation as the DNA was negative. So administration of HBIG will obviously lead to higher HBsAg negativity rate because it forms immune complexes and keeps HBsAg undetectable. But the additional clinical benefits remain questionable because there is an excellent long-term outcome, excellent survival, and liver stiffness measurements also are not changed whether HBsAg recurs or does not recur. But there is a problem with HCC patients. So in this study, there were 97 HCC patients with a median follow-up of 51 months. persistent HbA1c clearance in 88%, transient clearance in 10%, and no clearance in 1.1%. And out of the 97 HCC patients, 13 recurred, and in them 45.5% had HbA1c reappearance, whereas patients in whom there was no recurrence, reappearance was 7.4%. So patients with HCC recurrence have higher HbA1c recurrence also. And if we see the reverse, that is 36 patients who had either transient loss or reappearance, in them 10 patients had liver transplant, HCC at liver transplant, and out of them 60% recurred, whereas patients who did not have HCC, there was no de novo HCC recurrence. So that means that patients who did not have persistent loss of HbA1c, they will, if they have HCC at the transplant, then recurrence is high. Now, whether such a regime can be effective in if co-infected with HBV and HDV. So HBV provides HDV the biological support, because HDV requires HbA1c for its survival, and there is no therapy against HDV, so the combination of HBV and antivirals was adopted as a default for prophylaxis against HBV reinfection. Now, if we see theoretically, antivirals alone may seem dangerous, as HDV requires only HbA1c to coat its virions. So if HbA1c remains positive in 15% of the cases, then is it possible that there is a recurrence of HDV? There are no answers to this question. However, there have been studies in HDV related liver transplant when patients were put on antivirals alone after HBIG withdrawal. Initially they were given HBIG, but after 6 months to 1 year, HBIG was withdrawal and patients were followed up. And as we can see from this table that HBV-HDV recurrence was very less and zero in many trials. But further studies on high potency antivirals alone without HBIG, that means HBIG free regimes, are needed before it can be recommended. Now, whether HBIG and nucleotide analogs can be withdrawn completely after transplant, there has been one study which has evaluated this. This was a study from Italy. Patients were at least 6 years post liver transplant, and they had received HBIG plus nucleoside analogs at least 5 years post liver transplant. Importantly, they were HBe negative and DNA undetectable at the time of liver transplant. They had to undergo 4 liver biopsies. They had normal liver function and no evidence of recurrent disease in the first liver biopsy. They should have undetectable cccDNA and total HBV DNA in the liver transplant at the baseline liver biopsy. Then after liver biopsy showed that they were eligible for this protocol. Then after 6 months HBIG was withdrawal, and after 6 months after that the antivirals were withdrawn. And this was the HBIG regime that was used. 28 patients HBIG plus LAM and a few patients HBIG plus LAM plus adifovir. This was the regime used. If we see the baseline parameters, there were quite a few co-infected patients. Donor HbA1c positive status was 47% because it was a DDLT program. HCC at liver transplant was 1 in each case. And if we see the mean staging, most of the patients were having fibrosis 2. Mean was fibrosis 2 in both transplant before 2001 and after 2001. So there was a 20% HBV recurrence after follow-up, and 6 out of 30, that is 20% recurred, HBV recurred. And in one patient, it was 2 months after HBIG interruption, so antivirals could not be stopped in this patient, and promptly HBIGs were reinstituted, and there was no further problems in these patients. In 5 patients, both HBIG and nucleotide were withdrawal, and after that HBV recurred in 5 patients. 4 were early, 2 to 6 months, and 1 was late at 45 months. And out of these 5, 3 were transient HBsAg positive for less than 4 months, and ultimately they cleared. They remained HBV DNA negative, and there was a spontaneous anti-HBs conversion in all the patients. In 2 patients, HBV DNA also recurred, and they required treatment on tenofovir, and then no clinical events on follow-up. And 60% developed spontaneous anti-HBs seroconversion after that. 18 out of 30 patients, 3 out of 6 who had recurrence developed anti-HBs, and 15 out of 24 without recurrence. There was no predictors for spontaneous anti-HBs seroconversion. These were the factors that were studied as to find out whether there are any predictors. There was no predictor, whether it was co-infection or type of immunosuppression used, whether HCC was present or not. Fibrosis at baseline was also not significant predictor. So, is it possible for us to withdraw long-term immunoprophylaxis? In this study, in their cohort, only 7% of the patients were positive for total intrahepatic DNA, and 2% were positive for CCC DNA in their whole cohort. But such results have not been replicated by others. For example, in another study, it has been found that up to 45 to 50% of the patients who became HBsAg negative after transplant, and up to 10 years after transplant, they had persistence of DNA in the serum, PBMC or liver. So there could be various reasons for difference between these results. There could be variability in the DNA levels at transplant, E antigen positivity, HCC, duration of follow-up, what kind of prophylaxis were used, monocentric versus multicentric. There could be sampling variability, and importantly, sensitivity and specificity of the molecular techniques that are used to quantify CCC DNA. That could be an important variable. So withdrawal of both HBG and nucleotide analogs are not currently recommended because they need invasive sequential liver biopsy. There is a lack of standardization of the laboratory assay of quantification of total intrahepatic DNA and CCC DNA, and whether HBV replication within the PBMC or detection of the core antigen in the serum can be used as the CCC DNA in the liver surrogate, that remains unknown. So liver biopsy is mandatory, and we need to do 2 to 3 or 4 liver biopsies before this can be recommended. So let's go to the algorithm. First, we have to assess the risk, low risk patients and high risk patients. Low risk patients are acute liver failure, undetectable or low, that is less than 100 international unit per ml at liver transplant. No drug resistant variants, no HDV or HIV, no HCC or liver transplanting. You expect good compliance. Then these are low risk patients. High risk patients, reverse of this, high DNA more than 100 IU per ml, drug resistance, HDV or HIV co-infection, HCC at liver transplant, poor compliance. So in such cases, high potency antivirals, anti-COVID, tenofovir or TAF can be used. No HBG is required. If there is no recurrence, continue same. If there is recurrence with HBV DNA detectability, then restart HBG, check resistance to nucleotide or nucleoside analogs, and switch or add on to the another group of antiviral. In high risk patients, though HDV is at low risk, but because it requires HBsAg and HBsAg positivity is much more, so I have put it in high risk. So in high risk patients, high potency antivirals can be given, and long term HBG, that is at least 1 year, should be given. 10,000 unit in the hepatic phase, then IM daily for 7 days, then weekly for 3 weeks, then monthly, and keep anti-HBs more than 100 for at least 1 year. No recurrence, continue same. If recurrence with DNA detectable, start HBG, check resistance, and switch on or add on to other group.